Let's move on to Exhibit 555, which is that your report from December 18th of 2018?
Yes, it is.
All right. Let's start with, excuse me, item B14. What did B14 purport to be?
Item B14 was a swab of a reddish-brown stain reportedly from the interior rear driver's side door frame at marker 11.
All right. Okay, so we're seeing, if we can switch back, thank you. Marker 11 we see now. What can you tell us about that swabbing from marker 11?
So what's the photo again?
I'm sorry, 111, I think I forgot to say. I apologize.
All right, so item B14, which was from marker 11, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I then also obtained a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
Let's move to item B15.
Item B15 is a swab of a reddish-brown stain reportedly from the back of the driver's seat at marker 12.
All right, we'll move to Exhibit 112, Counsel. What can you tell us about the swabbing from marker 12?
So I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I also obtained a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
And let's move to item B19.
So B19 was a swab of a reddish-brown stain reportedly from the upper interior rear driver's side door frame at marker 17.
All right, we'll move to Exhibit 114. What can you tell us about that swab?
Marker 17.
114 and marker 17.
All right, so crime lab item B19, which is from marker 17, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I also obtained a male DNA profile and concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
All right, let's move to item B20.
Item B20 is a swab of a reddish-brown stain from the back of the driver's seat at marker 18.
We'll move to Exhibit 117, Counsel. All right, so we see marker 18 there. What can you tell us about that swab?
So item B20, which is from marker 18, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood, and I obtained a male DNA profile and concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
All right, how about B21?
Item B21 is a swab of a reddish-brown stain from the passenger side rear seat bottom at marker 21.
All right, and I'm going to show actually two exhibits. Let's start with Exhibit 118. I'm showing this one because it shows context. Marker 21 is located on the seat, and then we'll move closer. This is Exhibit 119 then. What can you tell us about marker 21 and item B21?
So item B21, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood, and I also obtained a male DNA profile and concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
What about item B23?
Item B23 is a swab of a reddish-brown stain from the interior taped opening of the rear driver's side window at marker 24.
All right, we're going to move to Exhibit 123, Counsel. All right, so we're seeing marker 24 here. What can you tell us about the swab found at marker 24, item B23?
So item B23, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I also obtained a male DNA profile and concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
And let's talk about item B31.
B31 is a swab of a reddish-brown stain at scale B5 above the rear driver's side window.
All right. And this will be Exhibit 138, Council. What can you tell us about that swab from B31?
So B31, I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I then also obtained a partial male profile, and that profile is consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodworth. This is one of those profiles that does not meet that 1 in 7 trillion statistic that we were talking about earlier. So I found that the probability of randomly selecting the observed profile from a population of unrelated individuals is approximately 1 in 9.7 million.
And what's the difference between this and some of the other ones that we've talked about where you're able to say that it's the source?
Yeah, so for this particular male profile, it was a partial male profile, meaning that I did not, or I was unable to obtain a full, complete profile. So some of those locations within our DNA that we test for, some of them I was unable to get any results from. So I obviously can't make any comparisons to those locations. So using the locations that we did get results from, those are consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodworth.
All right. And what could cause you from this particular swab to not get a full profile? What can cause you to not, for it not to all be there?
I mean, there are a couple of different things that could happen. One is that there could just be so little DNA present that there simply isn't enough DNA to obtain a complete profile. Another reason is that the DNA can be degraded. This can happen if DNA is out in the elements or out in the sun. The UV radiation can degrade DNA.
Okay. And then let's move on to item B32. What can you tell us about that one?
Item B32 is a swab of a reddish brown stain at scale B6 above the rear driver's side window.
And we're going to move to Exhibit 139 here, Council. What can you tell us about the swabbing from B6, item B32?
So I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I also developed a partial male profile, and I found that that profile is consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodworth. And then the statistic associated with that is 1 in 195 billion.
And again, this was not a full profile, but just a partial profile?
Correct.
And that's the reason why you can't determine it's the source versus just being consistent with?
That's correct.
All right. Mr. Scott, are all your conclusions, your testing, and your opinions based upon all of your training, your education, your experience, as well as all the facts and information you had as a result of the testing that you did in this case?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for Mr. Scott. Thank you.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, before we do cross-examination, or not we, before we have cross-examination, and I'm just going to back up a little bit. We've told you from the beginning that you can only decide this case based upon the evidence, but I don't think we've actually told you, or that I haven't told you, what evidence is. So first of all, evidence is the sworn testimony of witnesses received at trial. It's also exhibits received by the court at trial. But it also can include stipulations between the parties, and it can include judicially noticed facts. So at this point in time, I'm going to tell you about 2 stipulations and a judicially noticed fact that will be part of the evidentiary record in this case. So I'll read the stipulation reached between the parties, that the parties being the state of Wisconsin and the defendant, Ezra McCandless. It is hereby stipulated by the parties that items W3A, W9A, and W10A, which consist of cervical swabs, external genital swabs, and mons pubis swabs collected from Miss McCandless were tested by the state crime lab and did not produce scientifically usable evidence in this matter. Okay? So that stipulation you can consider to be evidence. Now, the second stipulation is that Alexander Woodworth was right-handed. Okay? That's number 2. Number 3, the judicially noticed fact the court has taken judicial notice of, and that is that the formula for converting kilograms to pounds is to multiply the kilograms by 2.2. And those are, again, will be evidence in the record. Now, at this point, Mr. Nelson, would you like to go ahead with cross-examination?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Scott, I want to ask you some questions that the state didn't ask you about. To begin with, in report number 13, that's your report dated November 14, 2008, which is exhibit 554, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. On that report, you tested an item documented as W12, is that right?
That's correct.
And W12 was a swab that had been given to you, or that had been included in a forensic kit that was provided to your lab, correct?
That's correct.
And the swab, according to the forensic kit, was a swab of Ms. McCandless's right upper thigh. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you were then able to take that swab and do DNA testing for that, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you were able to determine this, again, the presumptive positive for blood on that swab. Agreed?
That's correct.
And that there were, well, let me get to your report to make sure. It's on page 6, I believe. It's on both page 6 and on page 8. And on page 6, you say there is a single source female profile that is Ezra McCandless. Is that right?
Yes, so from the right upper thigh swabs, I developed a female profile, and I concluded that Ezra McCandless is the source of that female profile.
So you agree with my question that I asked?
Yes.
And then on page 8, you did additional testing of that swab. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you did that under what's called a YSTR profile. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And you found that that was consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodworth. Is that right?
Yes, so to explain this a little bit more, when we talk about DNA analysis, we actually have 2 different forms of DNA analysis that we can perform. The kind of DNA analysis that we have talked about throughout the entirety of my testimony up till now has been referred to as autosomal STR analysis, which is DNA from anybody, from males and females. In addition, we have a form of DNA analysis that we refer to as YSTR analysis, which only looks at DNA located on the Y chromosome. Females will have 2 X chromosomes, males will have an X and a Y chromosome. So by using this YSTR analysis, we can hopefully produce a YSTR profile, which is a profile developed from only DNA located on the Y chromosome. So this YSTR analysis essentially ignores any female DNA in a sample and will only test any male DNA that might be present. So in samples that have a large amount of female DNA and a relatively small amount of female DNA, if we attempt to obtain an autosomal profile, we might only obtain the DNA profile from that female individual, which was the case in this sample. However, part of our analysis is to test how much male DNA is also in a sample. Since I did detect male DNA in the sample, in addition to that female DNA, I also performed this YSTR testing. Now, YSTRs are a little different than autosomal analysis in the sense that YSTR profiles are not unique. Different males can share the same YSTR profile, and I would expect any paternally related male relatives, so any male relatives that share a father-son relationship should also share the same Y profile. Now, for these right upper thigh swabs, I did attempt this YSTR analysis, and I did obtain a YSTR profile, and I found that that YSTR profile is consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodworth. And then similar to any other evidentiary profile that I develop, I perform a statistical analysis on that YSTR profile. And essentially, we would not expect to observe this YSTR profile more frequently than approximately 1 in every 1,773 individuals in the U.S. population.
So you agree with my initial question, it's consistent with Alexander Woodworth, correct?
The male DNA is, yes.
And just like similar to some of the other results that you've indicated, when there's a positive, possible, presumptive blood, and you have two DNA sources, you can't say whether one contributed DNA and another contributed blood DNA and the other one contributed touch DNA. Agreed?
Correct. I don't know what the source of the DNA would be from.
Or you don't know if it's both are contributing blood DNA.
Correct. I don't know that.
And that W12 that we just talked about was the swab from Ms. McCandless's skin on her leg, according to the information that you were provided in this commonly called SANE kit. Is that right?
That's a common term for the kit, yes. The information provided on this sample was that it was collected from the right upper thigh, and that's all I know.
And you've also talked to us about testing that you've done of the genes that were presented to you. Is that right?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And now you took, you did notes for all of these tests to show in particular where you tested. Is that right?
That's correct.
So let's just talk about the genes to begin with, since we're on that.
I don't have, I'm fine with, Your Honor, probably have him just look at it as long as he identifies it, which I'm sure he will. I don't have a problem with it just being admitted and published.
Okay, and do we have an exhibit number yet?
Working on it, Judge.
Okay.
Counsel, what page again was that from there? Just so I know. Okay, thank you.
Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked Exhibit 656A, which corresponds with Crime Lab page 70. Is that right?
I believe the 70 would be annotation made by one of you guys, but I would refer to this as page 18 of 312.
But the page that's printed here says Crime Lab page 70. Agreed?
Yes, that is on the sheet of paper.
And then on 656B, it says Crime Lab 71, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Which is 19 of 312 on your annotation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You've seen these before?
Yes, it is a copy of my case notes.
You made these notes, is that right?
That's correct.
Move for the admission of Exhibit 656A and B.
No objection.
All right, exhibit 656A and B are received.
Permission to publish.
You may.
Showing you what's been marked as 656A, these are your notes, is that right, sir?
Yes, these are notes that I put together. I should note that these are not photographs that I took, though.
Mr. Mattson from your office took these photos?
I believe so, yes.
And then you worked with him to mark in particular where you took the samples, is that right?
Yes, I just got a copy of his photos and I put my own annotations on it.
And we see here in the middle of the page, it says M1 stain. Am I pointing to that correctly?
That's correct.
And that points to an arrow which represents the area on the genes where you took the sample to test, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's on the left side of the jeans as the person is wearing it, correct?
That's correct.
Somewhere, if not exactly, on the seam, very near the seam on the side of the pants, agreed?
Yes, that's correct.
At about hand length down if somebody's wearing that, agreed?
I don't know how long the individual in question's hands are, but it's about a third to half the way down the jeans.
Sure. About middle of the thigh there, correct? As far as vertical.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
All right. And that result, I believe you previously testified, came back presumptive for blood and identified as Ms. McCandless. Is that right? I believe that was M1, which you'd said was a mixture of at least two, one low-level contributor with a female major being Ezra, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Ezra McCandless was the source of the major female contributor DNA.
And then you did a if you turn it over and we look at 656B, do you see that on the screen?
Yes,
And that is, again, we see what you've indicated is M2 stain, is that right?
that's correct.
And that points to the area, again, where you tested the M2, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that came back presumptive blood for Alex, is that right?
That's correct.
And then we have M3, which you previously identified, and I'm marking that here on the screen, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And again, that came back presumptive blood, both Alex and Ezra, is that right?
Yes, that was a mixture of DNA in which Alexander Woodworth and Ezra McCandless are both included as possible contributors to that mixture.
I believe your testimony was multiple areas, you simply chose a representative sampling of the genes in general, correct?
Correct, yes.
It was your choice whether you wanted to test other areas of that gene or whether you didn't, is that right?
That's correct.
So the fact that there is not a test near any of the frayed defects, and when I say near, I mean like on the actual defect of the genes, that was your choice, agreed?
Well, Judge, I guess I'm going to object.
I'll
That
rephrase.
mischaracterizes the testimony, seeing as how the M2 stain is right next to a defect, so.
I'll rephrase. You chose to take the samples where you did, correct?
That's correct.
You saw that there were at least 3 defects to the genes, correct?
That's correct.
Which we could call holes, agreed?
That's correct.
And the holes have edges, agreed?
Yes,
And you would have been able to test the actual edge of any of those holes, agreed?
that's possible, yes.
And you chose not to do so, agreed?
Correct, that was not a form of analysis that I performed.
Okay. And on there was some leggings, did you ever see some leggings in this case?
I don't believe so.
Showing you what's been previously marked and admitted into evidence as Exhibit 569. Have you ever seen this article of clothing before?
No, I don't believe I examined that.
Nobody ever gave that to you?
It was not requested for DNA analysis, as far as I'm aware.
So you've never seen it, never had the opportunity to test it, agreed?
That's correct.
And that's based upon what the prosecution, you do your testing based upon what the prosecution team provides to you, agreed?
That's correct.
You testified about, well, let me ask you about some other items. Showing you it's been previously marked as Exhibit 639 and admitted into evidence. That appears to be a T-shirt, agreed?
That's correct.
Was that ever presented to you by the prosecution team for your testing?
No, I did not examine the shirt.
So you don't even know if there's any reddish-brown stains on there that would be possible to be tested?
I did not examine the shirt.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 640. You seen that shirt before?
No, I did not.
You were not presented by the prosecution team with this blue button-up shirt with white spots on it?
No, I did not examine that.
So you didn't have the opportunity to test any of the reddish-brown stains anywhere if there are on that shirt, agreed?
Correct, I did not examine the shirt.
So without your examination, it'd be hard to know whether A, that's blood, and B, whose blood it is, right?
I did not examine the shirt, correct.
And showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 619, that appear to be a gold sweater. At least a sweater, regardless of the color.
Yeah, it looks like some sort of sweater.
It appears to be a defect where it's cut, torn, ripped in half.
That's correct.
Have you ever seen that sweater?
No, I have not.
Did the prosecution team present that to you in any way or talk to you about that in any way?
No, I'm not aware of that sweater. I did not examine it.
Okay, so you don't know if there's any reddish-brown stains on that sweater that would even be possible to test?
No, I did not examine that.
Okay. You did examine this blue flannel shirt you talked about, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's the shirt that you'd taken 4 different samples of, is that right?
That's correct. This is crime lab item L.
Okay. I don't have any objection to any of those. In fact, if you just want to move them, I will stipulate to them.
Move for the admission of 657, 658, 659, and 660, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right.
Permission to
Exhibits 657, 658, 659, and 660 are received into evidence, and you may publish.
showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 660. You see the sticker number on there?
Yes.
And does that appear to be page 15 of 312 of your notes?
Yes, it does.
And this is the same blue flannel that I just had shown up there previously, correct?
Yes.
And on here, you've got your notes where you label exactly where it is that you did the swabbings, is that correct?
That's correct.
On the top portion of it, we see L1 stain, is that right?
That's correct.
And that points to the arrow where you took the L1 stain, agreed?
That's correct.
And then on the, just to take it in order, and then showing you what's been marked as 659, that's page 16 of 312 of your notes, is that right?
That's correct.
That's the same blue shirt, is that right?
That's correct. With the front opened up.
And that has marked on there where you've got the L2 swabbing, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's to indicate that it's on the inside of the flannel shirt, is that right?
That's correct.
Similar to like if I pulled my suit coat open, it'd be on the inside of my suit coat, correct?
That's correct.
And that's where you did sample L2?
Yes, that's correct.
And then back to Exhibit 660, in the bottom left-hand corner, we see stain L3, is that right?
Yes, that's correct on the right sleeve.
And then that's on the outside of the right sleeve, did you say?
Yes, the stain that I targeted when I swabbed was on the right sleeve.
Okay. And then L4 is in the bottom right-hand corner as we're looking at this Exhibit 660, is that right?
That's correct on the cuff of the left sleeve.
That's where stain L4 was, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And the results on all L1, 2, 3, and 4 were presumptive for blood, right?
That's correct.
And that they were for Ezra, McCandless, is that correct?
Correct.
And then the exact swabbings here that you had, I want to show you Exhibit 657, which is, that appear to be a picture of the boots that you tested for item D.
That's correct.
It says up on the top there, item D, you see that?
Yes, this appears to be a photo of the left boot, crime lab item D.
And the part where you swabbed was this, what appears to be this reddish-brown discoloration that is in a roughly vertical up and down stain?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's where you swabbed for what's been called D2, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that came back presumptive for blood, being Alex's blood, agreed?
To clarify, that was a confirmed blood, so blood was identified on that swab.
Okay.
Sorry, I confirmed the presence of blood, so blood was identified on that swab. And yes, it was, I did conclude that Alexander Woodworth was the source of that DNA.
And then showing you what's been marked as 658. That's item E, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's the other boot, the right boot?
That's correct.
And that shows here on the top the D2 swabbing that you did as well, correct?
The E2 swabbing, yes.
Yes, thank you for the E2 swabbing. And again, that was confirmed blood, correct?
That's correct.
And confirmed, and that it was Alex Woodworth's.
Correct. I concluded that Alexander Woodworth was the source of that DNA.
Now, you are not able to tell timing of when the DNA was, for lack of a better term, placed there or landed there or got there, agreed?
That's correct. I can only analyze the evidence as I receive it. I have no way of knowing how long the DNA had been present on that item before I received it.
Okay. And I want to go through with you.
If you want, Counsel, I can put them up on, they're going to be better quality if we do it from the computer.
I appreciate it, but I'll just make do, thank you. So I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 7D2. Do you see some evidence markers there?
Yes.
And you would previously testified about item F from trying to find the right report here. June 15, 2018, report number 9, you tested item F, is that right?
That's correct.
And item F was marker 9, is that right?
If I remember correctly, yes.
Do you need to check your notes?
That would be helpful.
Sure, go ahead. Do you have a copy of the reports there, or do you need to?
I did not put the marker number into my report for items D through O.
Okay.
But I did record in my notes what the packaging had stated.
Sure, hold on a second.
Your Honor, to speed things up, I would agree that item F was marker 9. That's fine.
I'll get you, do you have Exhibit 556, Madam Clerk? Can I just show them my copy of Exhibit 556 to speed it along?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. Showing you my copy of Exhibit 556, that might refresh your memory. According to Exhibit 556 is again marker 9, item F, is that right?
Yes, so marker 9 is described as a reddish-brown stain on grass at marker 9 on this sheet.
According to your results, that turned up presumptive positive for blood, and that it was Alex, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then 10 and 11 that we see on this photo those were each the cigarettes, is that right? If you look at Exhibit 556 to refresh your memory.
Yes, 10 and 11 were the cigarette butts.
And the cigarette butts were not presumptive for blood, agreed?
Correct, I did not test those for the possible presence of blood.
You tested the ends of those cigarettes, correct?
That's correct.
And they came back to be Alex Woodworth's DNA at 10 and 11, agreed?
Yes, one was a single source sample, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth was the source of that DNA. The other was a mixture in which I concluded that Alexander Woodworth was the source of the major contributor DNA.
And then in this photo, can you see Exhibit 12 up there, or excuse me, marker 12 where I'm pointing?
Yes, I see a marker 12.
And you can also see it in Exhibit 83, you see marker 12.
Yes,
That's the same marker 12 that I'm pointing to here with my pointer, is that right?
it would appear to be so.
And according to Exhibit 556, marker 12 is item I, is that right?
Yes, that looks to be so.
And that, again, was a presumptive positive for blood, correct?
That's correct.
And that it was Alex Woodworth's blood, is that correct?
I concluded that Alexander Woodworth was the source of the DNA that I detected from that.
And then showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 88. You see marker 15 there?
Yes, I do.
And that appears to be in a position near the front tire, agreed?
That appears to be so. I should clarify that I was never at the scene and probably haven't seen these photographs before either.
And marker, or item V in your report was a reddish-brown stain on a leaf at marker 15, is that right?
Yes, that appears to be so.
And again, that was tested positive, presumptive for blood, correct?
That's correct.
And that was Alexander Woodworth's, was the source of that DNA, agreed?
That's correct.
So according to your results, the source of the DNA at 9, 10, 11, 12, and 15 were all Alexander Woodworth, agreed?
I believe so, yes.
And then you asked many questions about the inside of the vehicle, is that right?
About swabs I had received from the inside, yes.
Correct. And including B11, which was at marker 8 on the inside rear door of the vehicle.
Which
Is that-
exhibit are we at here, Council?
Sure, I apologize. Exhibit 107.
7, thank you. And that's fine.
I don't think you can see it because of the glare.
Do you want it here, Council?
Thank you.
See it better?
That's marker number 8 shown you in exhibit 107, agreed?
That's correct.
And marker number 8 was, again, is that B11?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was tested presumptive for blood, correct?
That's correct.
And that was Ezra McCandless is the source of that blood, correct?
No, for item B11, we had a mixture of DNA, and Alexander Woodworth and Ezra McCandless are both included as possible contributors to that mixture.
Okay. And then I'm going to show you pictures, just, we have item 9 we can see in there, correct?
That's correct.
And then if you look at this photo, we can see maybe a...
What exhibit number are we?
Sure, exhibit 106. I'm going to show it to you here. You can see exhibit, or marker 12, 13, 18, and 15 in that photo. Is that right?
I believe so. It's a little hard to pick
Sure.
the numbers out.
Now that you saw it, I want to post it on here, exhibit 106. Again, markers 12, 13, 18, and 15. Those are the 4 markers I asked you about, correct?
I believe so.
And those 4 markers, again, showed the presumptive presence of blood, and your testing indicated that the source of that DNA was Alexander Woodworth, correct?
Well, we're going to have to take those one by one.
Sure. So I believe so I asked you about marker 12, that's B15,
That's correct.
and that was Alexander Woodworth is the source of that.
That's correct.
And I asked you about marker 13, that's B16 from report 13. And that's Alexander Woodworth is the source of that.
Sorry, what was the marker again?
Marker 13, item B16 from report 13, exhibit 554.
Yes, that's correct.
And then marker 18 on report number 14, item B20. That was Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then marker 15 on report number 13, exhibit 554, item B17. That was Alexander Woodworth, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So just again, we went a little quickly, but I want to, 12 is where I'm on the back of the seat, 13's on the back of the seat, 18's on the back of the seat, and 15's on the rear passenger seat. That's what we just went through. Agreed?
I believe so. It's
Okay.
a little hard to keep the markers in the crime lab item numbers straight.
And then there's some other markers throughout the back seat of the vehicle that we can just see here along the back seat as well as on the other door. Is that right?
That looks to be so, yes.
Okay. B21 is marker 21. Is that from the middle of the seat according to your notes?
I had the passenger side rear seat bottom.
Okay. Where my marker is pointing to now, in that vicinity?
I was not present when they collected the swabs.
But that's consistent with what you have written in your report, correct? In this area?
Yes, the passenger side rear seat bottom.
And again, that's, the source of that DNA was Alexander Woodworth.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And then you testified about a bunch of testing around the entryway to that rear driver's seat, kind of the frame around on the top of it as well as on the inside. Is that right?
I believe so.
And on those, so again, I can pull out some other pictures, but as you see here, the frame of this area, both on the bottom, on the side, and then if we extend it over across the top, correct?
I wouldn't know. I was not present when the samples were collected.
Okay. But those, the source of those, the DNA at those places was again Alexander Woodworth?
I mean, we would have to take it one by one again.
Okay. Marker 16, item B18, the upper interior rear side driver door, the source of that is Alexander Woodworth.
Yes, that's correct.
And then we have scale B1, B7, B8, and B9, which are swabs in that same area for items B30, 33, 34, and 35. I know I'm chunking these, if that's okay. Those are all along, again, that door frame, top to bottom and side, agreed? In that vicinity?
I believe so.
And those all come back as a source of that DNA is Alexander Woodworth, correct?
Well, B34 did not have enough DNA to warrant further testing. 30, 33, and 35 I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of those three.
So based upon your testing, we know that Alexander Woodworth's DNA is outside the vehicle as at the markers previously indicated in Exhibit 72, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 15. Is that right? We just went through that.
I believe so, yes.
And that Alexander Woodworth is the source of much of the DNA at the around the frame going into the vehicle, correct?
I believe so.
And that Alexander Woodworth is the source of the DNA inside in the back seat of the vehicle as well, correct?
Out of many of the samples I tested, yes.
In fact, I believe of the samples that you tested regarding the car, there was marker 1, which was on the outside rear of the vehicle. Item B1, that's the outside of the rear driver's side door. And that tested presumptive positive for blood, and that was Ezra McCandless, correct?
That's correct.
And then item inside the car, item 8, which we had previously saw the picture of, that was, the source of that DNA was both Ezra McCandless and Alexander Woodworth, correct?
Yes, they're both included as possible contributors to that mixture.
And then you had, and I don't think I have a picture of it up here, but you had item 3, which was on, sorry, marker 3, which is item B3, the swab of the brown stain on the trunk. That came back to be a presumptive blood, the source of that DNA being Ezra McCandless, correct?
That's correct.
So aside from those 3 that I just mentioned, the items that you tested inside or on the vehicle came back to be Alexander Woodworth as the source of the DNA when you were able to determine a source, correct?
For the swabs that I received, I believe so.
Okay. You talked a little bit about DNA trace evidence. You know what that is, correct? You know what DNA trace evidence is?
Yep, so, well,
Do you know what it is, sir?
to clarify, we do have a trace unit within the lab, and this trace unit deals with non-DNA related things. So could you clarify what you mean by trace?
I believe I asked you before, you can determine the source of DNA from fluids from a person, correct?
That's correct.
From touch DNA, which would be skin cells that are transferred, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in this case, were you provided any swabs taken, that were asking you to search for touch DNA?
I don't recall if I received any swabs looking for touch DNA. I did receive a number of items in which I swabbed for touch DNA.
Which items did you swab for touch DNA?
Well, the knives I swabbed. And then the item B4 jacket, or the coat that was recovered from the vehicle. So I have the interior cuff area looking for touch DNA.
Were you provided any swabs regarding touch DNA in the front of the vehicle, on the steering wheel, dash, center console, anything in the front area of the vehicle regarding touch DNA?
Regarding touch, I don't believe so. There were swabs of reddish-brown staining from that area, if I remember correctly.
Okay, and there was the swab of the reddish brown staining from the front of the steering wheel, correct?
That's correct.
And then from the, if someone were sitting in that position, behind the right shoulder in the driver's front seat, correct?
Could you clarify which
Sure.
item
I
you're
believe it's
referring to?
item 33, or marker 33, B27, the upper portion of the driver's seat at marker 33.
Yes, item B27 was a swap from the upper portion of the driver's seat at marker 33.
Those are the items, and then you had the painting, which I believe was marker 25, B24, that was in the front seat as well, correct?
That's correct.
That was the limit of the things that the items that you tested, whether they be swabs or actual material from the front seat, agreed?
If you could give me a second to
Sure.
read through all these. I believe that's correct.
Okay. And just to follow up on the touch DNA, I believe your testimony was touch DNA is DNA left behind on an object from skin cells after handled by a subject, agreed?
That's what we commonly refer to touch DNA as, correct?
And sometimes you're able to obtain a swab that collects that touch DNA, and sometimes you're not, correct?
Could you clarify?
Sure. Like if I touch this microphone and you came and swabbed it, it may or it may not come back with my DNA, correct?
Correct.
It depends on different factors, agreed?
That's correct.
And I believe you said the three factors would be the length of the contact, agreed?
There's probably more than three factors, but yes, the three that I referred to.
You referred to three, correct?
That's correct.
And the three that you referred to was one, the length of the contact, correct?
Correct.
Environmental conditions, correct?
Correct.
Obviously, if something is on the inside where they're not in contact with rain, snow, or weather, that's probably less of a concern, agreed?
I would agree.
And then it depends upon the person who's doing the touching or the leaving of the DNA, correct?
That's correct.
Some people just leave more DNA than others, agreed?
That's true.
And on this case, you were able to obtain DNA from the markers 10 and 11, which were the cigarettes that were found at the scene, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was not tested for blood, agreed?
Correct.
So you don't know whether that DNA was from touch DNA or from some other source, agreed?
Correct. It didn't look like reddish-brown staining that would be consistent with blood, so it wasn't an item that I tested for blood. But I agree that I don't know what the source of the DNA is on those items.
But it was Alexander Woodward's DNA, correct?
Correct.
And it would certainly be consistent with somebody who has a cigarette and smokes that cigarette and puts their fingers and hands on that cigarette, correct?
Correct.
Could also, obviously, if they put that cigarette in their mouth, come from fluids from their mouth.
That's correct.
Could be either of those, correct?
Yeah, it could be from any source of DNA. That's correct.
All right. The tests that you talked about here in your reports, you had Exhibit 339, which is Report 9. That's from June 15th of 2018, is that right?
That's correct.
And then you had Exhibit 555, which was report number 4. Excuse me, I'm going to go before that. Exhibit 554, which is report number 13, dated November 14th of 2018. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then you have the third report is Exhibit 555, report 14 from December of 2018, correct?
That's correct.
Those are the three reports that you did, correct?
That's correct.
Based upon the three submissions that were given to you, correct?
That's correct.
All in 2018, correct?
That's correct.
No additional submissions have been given to your lab that you're aware of in 2019 at all, correct?
Not for DNA analysis. There might have been another submission for a different unit, but that's correct for DNA
But
analysis.
if there were going to be some requests for more DNA submissions, it would go through you, right?
I would hope so.
You're the one that's been working on it already, correct?
That's correct.
That would certainly be the policy of your office is, hey, Mr. Scott's already working on it, let's push these through to him, correct?
That's typically what we do, yes.
All right. The You've used the term consistent with in some of your reports, is that right?
That's correct.
There's different terms that sometimes you use in your work. Sometimes you use the term consistent with, agreed?
That's correct.
Sometimes you can exclude somebody, correct?
That's correct.
And sometimes you can match, I think, is that the term that you would use? Is there something more positive than consistent with?
Well, we would generally refer to like a complete match, like you phrased it as we would refer to it as a source statement. So when I've been saying that so-and-so is the source of any in particular DNA profile, I guess that would be the like the match that you termed.
Okay, and so source statement, match mean the same thing, at least for today, between the two of us, you would agree?
Yes, that's correct.
And those are the three standards as far as opinions that you give, agreed?
Occasionally we can give an inconclusive opinion, but yes, those are the three typical ones that we run into.
Okay. And there's a reason that sometimes you don't do the match, then you just say something is consistent with, correct?
That's correct.
Because it is, as the phrase speaks for itself, consistent with could mean lots of things might be consistent with it, agreed? We'll get into the math for yours, but just in general, the phrase consistent with means more than one might be consistent with it.
I guess I'm going to object, Your Honor. It calls for speculation, and, whether it means the same thing for him as it means for somebody else is pure speculation.
I didn't say it. I'm asking him questions. I'm not asking him to apply it to anybody
Well,
else.
if he wants to know what consistent with means for him, that's fine, but not to generalize it to other people, what they mean by consistent with.
All right, why don't you just rephrase the question?
Sure. You use the term consistent with in your profession, agreed?
I do, yes.
And you consider yourself a scientist, agreed?
I have.
And it's the term that you use when you use the term consistent with is what you hope is within that scientific community, correct?
I guess I'm going to object. I'd ask that it be more clarified. Is he talking about DNA scientists, or is he talking about scientists in general? And if this witness even knows what scientists in general means, I'd like it to be more clarified.
All right, well, I'll sustain that. I guess you have to, it's what this witness, what he believes consistent means.
You use the term consistent, correct?
That's correct.
What do you use it? Why do you use it? What does it mean?
So anytime I make a comparison between a standard profile from a known individual and an item of evidence, if we find that we have a single source comparison and that the evidentiary profile, I guess as you would say, matches the standard that we're comparing to, if the standard and the evidence matches, we would that means that each of the locations that we're testing for have the same numbers, essentially the same number of repeats that we're testing for in our DNA analysis. So if each of those are the same, we would say that these two profiles are consistent. And then to go a step further, if we perform that statistical analysis and it's more rare than 1 in 7 trillion, we would just say that that person is the source of that profile. Whereas if we don't have that particular level of strength, or if it doesn't meet 1 in 7 trillion, instead of saying that they're the source, we'll say that this profile is consistent with the standard.
So when you lack for lack of a better term, the confidence to say something is a match, you use the term consistent with. Is that fair? And I know it's not just confidence in you're just winging it. I just meant when you lack the scientific confidence to match something, then you use the term consistent with in your practice. Agreed?
I would say that's fair, yes.
Okay. But there's also times when you, on the other side of it, you can exclude certain options. Agreed?
That's correct.
All right. You also did some swabbings of the knife in this case, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 661. Can you tell us what that is?
Your Honor, we'd agree to its admission and publication.
All right, you offering 661?
Yes, please.
All right, Exhibit 661 will be received and you may publish.
What is that?
So Exhibit 661 is a copy of my case notes for item O, the knife.
You previously testified about your taking different swabbings of item O, the knife, agreed?
That's correct.
I believe you said you took 4 swabbings, is that right?
That's correct.
And you labeled those 4 swabbings where they were in particular here on Exhibit 661, is that right?
The 03 and 04 swabbies are labeled on this, yes.
And the 03 swabbing is written in this area here that I'm highlighting, agreed?
That's correct.
And that's on the left picture of the knife, on the upper portion of the knife, on the, I don't know, on the thicker side rather than the blade or the edge side, agreed?
That's correct.
So on the 03 swabbing on the side of the knife, that came back as Alex Woodworth is the source of that DNA, agreed?
That's correct.
And then this photo also shows 04, you said, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that is this area that I'm pointing to here, is that correct?
In that general area, yes.
Okay.
There was some staining right around that little knob.
And that is, again, was the source of that DNA was Alexander Woodward, correct?
That's correct.
And then you'd taken a sample on the edge of the blade, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you take a photo like you did of this one? I wasn't able to find it. Is there a photo of where you took the swabbing of 01?
No, I don't believe I made a label for that one. That was just along the sharp edge of the blade.
Can you just show us where that is here with the pointer, what you mean by the sharp edge of the blade? I think it's the red dot there.
Yeah, so the sharp edge of the blade, like all along here.
Okay, so on the,
Both sides, probably.
sure. On the left picture, you took a swabbing of the farthest to the left of that, and on the right picture, to the farthest to the right of the edge of the blade is what you're saying, correct?
That's correct.
From tip down to the handle.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And on that, on 01, the edge of the blade, the source of that is Alexander Woodworth, correct?
That's correct.
And then you also took a sample of the handle, agreed?
That's correct.
And do you know, was it just in general on the handle? Was there any place in particular that you recalled?
Yeah, so when I swab smooth surfaces like that handle of the handle of this knife, I typically want to try and preserve that item for any future fingerprint analysis. So in the event that somebody would want this knife analyzed for fingerprints, I avoided swabbing any smooth surfaces. So when I took the swabbing, it was mostly along the edge.
Why don't you show us again?
Sure. So it's mostly along like the edge of the knife. It's like along here, and then probably like the edge of this clip thing, and any place that fingerprints would not show up on.
Okay, do you know if there was, let me back up for a second, do you know if there was a fingerprint analysis of that done?
I'm not aware of one, if there was.
Okay. And the swabbing of the handle came back with 2 different sources, is that correct?
Correct, I had a mixture of DNA from two individuals.
And the mixture of those two individuals was from Alexander Woodworth and Ezra McCandless, is that right?
That's correct.
And I think as you previously stated, because it came back presumptive for blood, is that right?
This one was a confirmed blood.
Confirmed blood. But the fact that there's two sources of that DNA, you're not able to say whether Alexander Woodworth was the source of the blood, or Ezra McCandless was the source of the blood, or both of them were the source of the blood. Agreed?
Correct, that's not something that I can determine.
So that finding would be consistent with Ezra McCandless's being the source of the blood and Alexander Woodworth's DNA being from touch DNA. Agreed?
That is not something that I can determine.
Okay, that's consistent with that based upon your findings, right? One, you can't determine it, but it's consistent with that. Agreed? Because
I mean, it could be any situation. One could be blood, one could be skin, both could be blood. It's not something that I could make any sort of statement on.
And so what you're saying is it's consistent with one of the
Your Honor,
people.
I'm going to object. It's been asked and answered. He said he can't answer it, and
He didn't say that.
he's given his best answer that he can give. It's been asked and answered.
Sustained.
Fair to say, based upon the tests that you've done, you can't rule out that Alexander Woodworth handled that knife. Agreed?
That isn't something I can make a statement on.
Those are the only questions I have.
All right, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. I want to start out talking about item W12, which is in Exhibit 554, your November report. So I understand it correctly, you did both autosomal DNA analysis on that and YSTR analysis. Is that right?
To clarify, you said W12?
Yes, W12.
Yes, that's correct. I
All right.
performed both forms of analysis.
All right. And the autosomal DNA, in other words, the full DNA profile, was the defendant, correct?
Yes, I concluded that Ezra McCandless was the source of that DNA.
All right. And then there was some YSTR that you were able to separate out, correct?
That's correct. I did develop a YSTR profile.
All right. And if I understand it correctly, YSTR is just the DNA that's found on the Y chromosome, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And just so that it's clear and so we understand each other, W12 was the swab of the right thigh of the defendant, correct?
That's correct. It was the right upper thigh from Ezra McCandless.
All right. And with YSTR, for example, you would expect that I would have the exact same YSTR as my two brothers, my father, my paternal grandfather, and on up the line, correct?
Barring some sort of mutational event, yes, I would expect that.
All right. And if I had had a son, it would be the same as a son of mine would have, again, barring any mutational changes.
That's correct.
All right. And you, similar to the analysis of the autosomal DNA, you come up with a statistical calculation for YSTR, correct?
That's correct.
All right. What is the statistical calculation for YSTR with the profile that you developed for males in the United States?
We would not expect to observe this profile more frequently than approximately 1 in every 1,773 individuals in the U.S. population.
All right. And that compares to, I think, the lowest of the autosomal DNA ones that you had was 1 in 9 point some million?
It was somewhere around there. Yeah.
All right. And as far as Caucasian males, what would be the statistical calculation for that YSTR profile for Caucasian males?
So to clarify this a little bit, when we perform this statistical analysis on the YSTR profile, we break it down into different racial groups. And these statistics are heavily dependent on how many profiles are in this database that we're using to calculate this. So essentially, what we're doing is we take this evidentiary YSTR profile that we have and search it against 5,305 profiles that are in this database. And we found that this profile occurred 0 times. So we did not observe this particular profile in the database that we use. So using the U.S. population, we would not expect to observe this profile more frequently than 1 in every 1,773. Since there are fewer Caucasians in the database, this number is going to be lower. We would not expect to observe this profile more frequently than 1 in every 499 individuals in the Caucasian population.
For DNA results, those are not very conclusive results, are they?
Objection as to the form of it.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Can you tell us how I guess, discriminating those results are compared to your typical DNA results?
Objection, form of the question, vague as to the use of the word discriminatory.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nelson, I couldn't hear the full.
Objection as to the form, also vague as to the use of the word discriminatory. Not sure.
I'm going to overrule. You can answer. If you can.
Yes, so typically the goal is to develop an autosomal profile, because autosomal profiles, which are the DNA profiles from both males or females, are much more discriminating in the sense that most people have a unique profile with the exception of identical twins. With YSTR profiles, these are not as discriminating because different unrelated male individuals can share the same Y profile. And as we discussed, paternally related male individuals should share the same Y profile as well.
And Mr. Scott, are you aware if, does the crime lab only test items that are submitted by law enforcement or prosecutors?
That is typically the most common form of evidence submission. However, there is a defense by court order type situation in which a court can order the lab to test items, and that does occur every so often.
And those would be items submitted by the defense?
Approach, objection to approach.
Okay. Objection is sustained.
All right. You were asked some questions about cigarette butts. And which part of the cigarette butt do you typically test when you receive a cigarette butt for testing?
Yeah, so typically when we receive a cigarette butt, the question is who was smoking it. We test the area around the very end of the cigarette butt, the filter paper that covers that area, or the area that would most likely be in somebody's mouth.
All right. And I think you talked about buccal swabs. Essentially, a buccal swab is taking, what is it taking? What are you getting with a buccal swab?
We're intending to get cells from the inside of your cheek.
All right. And is that typically from something like saliva?
Objection beyond the scope of my cross.
I don't believe it is, Your Honor.
Overrule. You can answer if you can.
Yes, I would expect there to be saliva in a buccal swab.
And is that the same type of thing you would expect to see on a cigarette butt?
I'd imagine anything in your mouth could have saliva on it.
I do not have any other questions for Mr. Scott.
Right. Any recross?
Yes. Mr. Scott, I want to follow up on some questions you were asked about the item W12. Do you remember that?
Yes, the right upper thigh swabs.
That's the right upper thigh swabs from the same kit exam, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's where you talked about a YSTR profile, agreed?
That's correct.
And a YSTR profile is a valid DNA profile, correct?
Yes, it is.
You rely upon those profiles in your work all the time, correct?
That's correct.
It's just like all of your other opinions, it's scientifically reliable, and that's why you offered it, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, that profile on the W12 was consistent with Alexander Woodward, correct?
That's correct.
You were provided with 3 male standard samples, correct?
That's correct.
And the other 2 male standards you excluded, correct?
That's correct.
But Alexander Woodworth was not excluded, was he?
That's correct.
His profile was a profile consistent with Alex Woodward, correct?
Yes, the YSTR profile from the right upper slabs was consistent with the profile from Alexander Woodward.
Now, the questions that the state asked you about this YSTR, that was all regarding W12, correct?
That's correct.
The source of the DNA on the knife handle at 03, that wasn't YSTR, was it?
No.
I didn't ask about that.
Asking
So I did not ask about the knife in my redirect. However, if court wants to allow him to go beyond the scope, as long as I have the ability to do some additional redirect afterwards, I don't have an objection. Otherwise, I would have an objection.
All right, I'll tell you what,
One
well,
question.
hold on, just hang on.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to let you go with this, Mr. Nelson, and then I'm going to give Mr. Dufour an additional second redirect on that issue, because it is beyond the scope of redirect.
That's fine, then I'll just leave it as is. Thank you, Judge.
All right. Okay, it's, well, I guess first of all, Mr. Scott, I think you're free to go. I'm assuming you're free to go. So have a safe trip back to Madison. You can step down and have a good day. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take an afternoon break here. We're gonna break for 15 minutes. It may get a little longer. There are a few things that we have to address, but we'll try and be as quick as we can. So, all rise. Okay, by the way, did we ever locate the missing exhibits? Okay, and what are those numbers?
I think the clerk has them, I don't know them off the top of my head, but I will continue to look.
All right, well, just a housekeeping matter, we need to either replace those exhibits, and again, Mr. Nelson, if you could please put your microphone on. I just want to go back to this. I think there was just this. One sidebar that I can recall during Mr. Scott's testimony. Well, actually, there are a couple that we have to address, but the first that I would like to address is the one that took place here at about 2:56 p.m. and redirect. Mr. Dufour was asking about the opportunity for defense counsel to request that certain things be tested, which there's an objection made. Certainly that may be the case, but the objection, the sidebar, was Mr. Nelson essentially arguing that crosses the line on burden shifting, and that the defendant has no burden of proof in this case, and the burden of proof is entirely upon the state. Mr. Nelson asked for an instruction to the jury. I didn't give that instruction to the jury at this point in time. It's been made, I think, abundantly clear to them during voir dire and opening statements that the state has the burden of proving every element of the offense, including if self-defense is put in issue, that it was not in self-defense. And the jury certainly will be instructed at the close of the case. It's one of those borderline issues, but the court sustained the objection just frankly to be on the safe side with respect to that issue, because the defendant does not have the burden of proof, even though the defense certainly can offer evidence. It doesn't mean they have to. So anything, either party, I guess the counsel handling that witness, Mr. Dufour or Mr. Nelson, would like to put on the record with respect to that argument.
Nothing else, Your Honor, no.
Okay, Mr. Nelson.
No, that accurately reflects what we did on the sidebar.
All right, now As I understand it, we may have to go through some issues related to Ms. McCandless' journals or her writings before we have the testimony of investigator Stalker. Does the state anticipate calling investigator Stalker yet today?
I'm not, excuse me, I'm not sure if we will actually get to him today. The defense did provide the redactions on the journals. I believe the state agrees. So I don't know if there's any issue on that.
I didn't know that they agreed, but we did provide them with our proposed redactions, so.
All right, so
So if we do get to Stalker, though, I do think that there's a few items regarding confidentiality that we might want to take a short recess before introducing those. But I anticipate that he won't go till tomorrow.
all right. Who do you anticipate as your next witness?
So Aaron Matson regarding the photographs of the clothing, and then Joshane Carlin. I would like to ask the court if Mr. Carlin could come into the courtroom shortly before him testifying. My office has not had the ability to meet with him. I know the defense has, but I understand there's some concerns regarding confidentiality in court TV that he has, and I would like those to be addressed before he testifies.
And we have no objection. I know that Your Honor had issued some rulings limiting what he could say, and so since he's not on our witness list, we haven't informed him. I think we've told him of what Your Honor's rulings were, but it'd probably be good to go over those beforehand here in court, just to make sure it's clear, since he's the state's witness, that he knows what has been, just knows to follow the court's rulings.
Is there more than his lay opinion that the court had?
Don't have the provisional ruling.
Well, let me ask you this, so I can look at the actual motion, but it related to the defense motion, eliminate as it relates to lay opinions?
That, as well as some information relating to her car and driving, and then he has some confidentiality concerns.
All right. And I just, again, give counsel a heads up. My understanding is I was incorrect. It's not a 20-minute delay, it's a 2-minute delay. So if you anticipate certain items, phone numbers, addresses, personal identifying information, we frankly need to give them a heads up so that that can be anticipated.
If I could, Your Honor, I think I understand. Mr. Carlin is an employee in, all right, can we, it's something, he has concerns about based on his job being identified and shown. So we're asking that he be blurred out.
All right. Is there,
I wasn't aware of that. I need some time to think before I can respond on that, Judge. I think as an officer of the court, I should tell Your Honor that he informed me this afternoon over the lunch break that he had watched. He's not our witness, so we didn't instruct him one way or the other, but he had informed me that he had watched, I think what he told me is 5 minutes of court TV, and while he was in the process of watching court TV, he received a call from the district attorney's office indicating that he shouldn't be doing that, and then he turned it off. But I'm just passing that on.
all right. Well, any suggestions on how to handle those issues?
Judge, I guess my concern is I think the jury has a right to know some background information on him. So if, the first, 5, 10 questions of mine, I think Mr. Carlin would not like to be out in the public, but I would like to still ask so the jury hears that information. And then as far as blurring out his face, I'll defer to the court.
Well, it is a public trial. And even though there's, more than one media representative, this, very well could be on local television. So unless again, if I look at section 906.11, subsection 1C, if there are concerns about harassment or undue embarrassment, maybe we can address that. But, otherwise, again, it is a public trial. I certainly don't think that everything has to be, stated while he's on the stand necessarily as it relates to personal information. I don't know what, again, counsel anticipates asking him, but I don't believe that you need to have any phone numbers or addresses, or where he works for that matter. Is that something that counsel believes is important?
To be honest, the defense might bring it up if the state doesn't, so.
All right, well, let's take a recess, and would you anticipate him to be soon?
Yes, after Mr. Mattson.
Okay.
Counsel, I think we should just approach the bench for a minute. I think we should approach the bench.
Okay, well, I tell you what, one counsel from each side, I guess, to address the issue, we'll do a sidebar.